Before the war, George Patton privately wrote that a black soldier could not think fast enough to fight in a tank. Yet in the autumn of 1944, he climbed onto an armored car before a battalion of black tankers and delivered a speech that would become legend. To understand the speech, you first have to understand the belief behind it. In the years before the Second World War, the leadership of the United States military held it as near certain fact that black men could not operate armor in combat. A tank, they argued, demanded speed of thought, quick decisions under fire, technical skill and nerve, and the prevailing prejudice of the time insisted that black soldiers simply did not have it. Study after study, written by white officers, said so. One senior officer, looking back on the First World War, had declared in writing that as fighting troops, black men had to be rated as second class, blaming what he called their inferior intelligence and lack of moral qualities. That kind of judgment, dressed up as expertise, was the wall these men were up against. Black troops were funneled into labor and supply, kept away from the machines of war. And George Patton, the most aggressive tank commander America ever produced, shared that view completely. In his own private writing, he put it in the bluntest possible terms. A colored soldier, he wrote, cannot think fast enough to fight in armor. This was not a passing thought. It was the settled opinion of the man who would one day be their commander, the very general whose reputation was built on the lightning speed of tanks. So how does a man who believed that end up with an entire battalion of black tankers serving under him, carrying his name into history? The answer is not that Patton changed his mind. The answer at first was simply that he ran out of other options. By October of 1944, Patton's Third Army was racing across France, and it was chewing through men and machines faster than they could be replaced. Patton needed tankers. He sent word back to the War Department demanding more armor, the best available, and he did not much care where it came from. But there was only one fresh tank battalion left to give him. It was the 761st, an all-black unit, the Black Panthers. There was a reason a black tank unit even existed to be sent. A few far-sighted senior officers, chief among them the general in charge of America's ground forces, had argued that the country simply could not afford to waste the manpower of millions of black citizens and had pushed against heavy resistance to let black soldiers serve in armor at all. The 761st owed its very existence to that fight. And now, after 2 years of waiting and training, the unit that so many had assumed would never see combat was being handed to the most aggressive tank general in the American Army. When it was pointed out to Patton that the only tankers left were black, the story goes that he fired back in his usual blunt style. "Who asked for color?" he snapped. "I asked for tankers." And so, at his own request, the 761st Tank Battalion was assigned to the Third Army of the one famous general who had written in his own hand that men like them could not do the job. These were not raw, untested men. Whatever Patton believed, the 761st had spent more than 2 years becoming one of the best trained tank units in the entire Army, and they had been told, again and again, exactly how much was riding on them. The battalion had trained for over 2 years at Camp Claiborne in Louisiana and at Camp Hood in Texas, under the demanding leadership of a white commander named Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bates, a man who came to respect and defend his soldiers fiercely. Most of the officers were black, a rarity for the time, with a handful of white officers among them, leading a battalion of black enlisted men. During their training, a senior general had rated the unit as superior, better than most. Among their number, for a time, had been a young lieutenant named Jackie Robinson, who would later break the color barrier in baseball, but who was court-martialed and acquitted for refusing to move to the back of an Army bus and never shipped out with them. these men knew that they were not just fighting for themselves. They carried the knowledge that if they failed, it would be used to condemn every black soldier who came after them. They had trained for this moment their whole military lives, and now they were about to meet the general whose name they would carry forever. It was the 28th of October, 1944, in France. The men of the 761st had paused for final checks and repairs before going into the line. And then Patton's entourage roared up in a cloud of dust. The general himself, wearing the ivory-handled pistols he was famous for, climbed up onto the hood of an armored car so that every man could see him. This was the same speech in its way that the movies would later put in his mouth in a grand theater. But the real audience for these words was not a Hollywood set. It was a battalion of black tankers about to go and die for a country that treated them as less than equal. But here is where the story turns and where it becomes something deeper than a simple tale of a rousing speech. Because we know what Patton said to those men, and we also know what he said about them in private just moments later. After reviewing the battalion, Patton returned to his headquarters, and there, away from the men he had just inspired, he gave his real assessment. "They gave a good first impression," he remarked, "but I have no faith in the inherent fighting ability of the race." Read those two statements side by side. To their faces he told them he had nothing but the best, and that his eyes were on them with great expectations. Behind their backs, he said he had no faith that they could fight at all. That was the contradiction these men served under. The general whose name they would carry did not, in his heart, believe in them. On the 7th of November 1944, the Black Panthers entered combat for the first time, smashing into fortified towns in eastern France. The fighting was savage from the very first hour, some of it at brutal close range against dug-in German troops, who had every advantage of prepared positions and were determined to hold. It was the kind of baptism that broke green units, and the 761st did not break and did not fail. They fought through it, town by town, taking their objectives and taking their losses, and they kept advancing. The commendations began almost at once. A senior general, whose infantry the tankers had supported, went out of his way to write that the 761st had entered combat with such conspicuous courage and success that it deserved special recognition, praising how quickly these men had adapted to the front line under terrible weather, and the gallantry with which they had faced some of Germany's finest troops. In their very first battles, they were already earning the kind of words that no one in the army had expected to write about them. And then they simply did not stop. The 761st went on to fight for 183 days in continuous combat, longer than almost any other American unit in the European War, without ever being pulled from the line for a real rest. They fought across France, into Belgium, into Germany, and finally into Austria. And it was during the most desperate battle of the entire war in the West that Patton showed, through his actions, if not his private words, exactly how much he had come to rely on these men. In December of 1944, the Germans launched their last great offensive through the frozen forests of the Ardennes, the battle we remember as the Battle of the Bulge. Patton wheeled his Third Army north to break through and relieve the surrounded town of Bastogne, and the 761st went with him, fighting through heavy resistance at places like the village of Tillet to help split the German lines. And there is one detail from those days that speaks louder than any speech. The Germans had begun disguising commandos in captured American uniforms to slip through the lines and cause havoc at the checkpoints. Patton's solution was to place black soldiers, including the men of the 761st, on those checkpoints, and to give them the authority to watch the white soldiers passing through and stop anyone who seemed suspicious. Think about what that means. The general who privately doubted these men now trusted them in his army's most dangerous hour to guard the line and to judge the very soldiers who had always looked down on them. Over their 183 days of combat, the Black Panthers were among the units that helped break through the Siegfried Line, the fortified wall guarding Germany itself. They were among the first Americans to link up with the Soviet army pushing in from the east, meeting them at a river in Austria as the war in Europe came to its end. They had liberated dozens of towns and inflicted enormous losses on the enemy. The price was staggering. The battalion suffered a casualty rate of close to half its strength and lost dozens of its tanks in the fighting. These were not men holding a quiet sector. These were men in the thick of the hardest fighting the Third Army did, over and over, for half a year. One senior commander, whose airborne troops the 761st supported, said plainly that he had been able to send far more of his men home alive because of the effectiveness of those black tankers. Patton was, by the standards of any era, a bigot, and his private writings make that painfully clear. And yet the same man did things that cut against his own prejudice. Late in the war, when casualties left him short of men, Patton became one of the first American commanders to put black soldiers directly into the ranks of white combat units. Years before the war, while commanding a post in Texas, he had once stepped in to stop a black soldier from being lynched. And whatever he muttered at headquarters, he had lent his name and his reputation to a black unit at a time when almost no other senior officer would, and he had used that unit again and again as one of his most effective. His name became their name. To this day, the 761st is remembered by a nickname that will never come off them: Patton's Panthers. The men whose fighting ability he privately dismissed made his name part of their honor forever and made themselves part of his legend. They did not win his belief with arguments. They took it from him, one battle at a time, until the record spoke so loudly that his doubts no longer mattered. For years after the war, the story of the 761st was pushed to the margins, the way the stories of so many black units were. The men came home to the same segregated country they had left, a country where, in many places, they still could not vote or eat where they pleased, despite everything they had done in Europe. The highest honors were withheld. It would take more than 30 years before the battalion received a Presidential Unit citation for its extraordinary service, and it was not until 1997, more than 50 years after the war, that Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers of the 761st, who had refused evacuation from his wounds and died covering his comrades, was finally awarded the Medal of Honor his actions had earned. The recognition came late, and for many of the men, it came too late to see. Patton once wrote that black soldiers could not think fast enough to fight in tanks, yet the men he doubted became one of the Army's finest armored battalions and helped build his legend. They did not merely prove him wrong, they earned the name Patton's Panthers and gave it its meaning. If you believe these men deserve to be remembered, subscribe and stay with this channel. There are more of these stories than you could ever imagine, and almost no one is telling them.